Presidency, I congratulate you to the German Media Prize from the bottom of my heart. Der Deutsche Medienpreis 2016 geht an den 44. Präsident der Vereinigten Staaten,
Well, Mr. President, thank you so much for those extraordinarily kind words. I want to thank Karl-Heinz for his generous introduction. I am extremely humbled to be receiving this German Media Prize. And unlike the Nobel Committee, I'm grateful that you waited until I was out of office before bestowing it on me. I only wish that my daughters were here tonight because I have an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old, and when you have teenage girls, they don't think their dad is all that important. And so I wish they'd been listening to both of you, because then maybe they'd listen to me. But I very much appreciate this. I want to thank the governor for his kind words. And I do also want to acknowledge Dr. Schäuble, who he and I attended. I've lost count of how many G20s and G7s and EU meetings, but he was a great collaborator in helping to save the world economy and has guided Germany extraordinarily well, along with so many others that I worked with over the last 8.5 years. So thank you very much for your outstanding work. I also want to say at the beginning of my remarks that, like so many others, I was horrified by the heinous attacks in Manchester, England the other night. And I want to once again offer my condolences to the people of the United Kingdom, because we've seen attacks like this in Berlin and in Paris and in Brussels and in many places in the United States. We have to constantly remind ourselves that these aren't attacks on government buildings or military targets. They're attacks on places where ordinary citizens gather. In this circumstance, many children gathered. It was an attack on a free and open society. And it was an attack on the spirit of democracy itself. I believe that those who are responsible will ultimately be brought to justice. And I know this not only because the confidence that I have in our military and our intelligence services and our law enforcement, but most importantly because I know the character of our peoples. And you could see it in the way that the people of Manchester responded, not simply with fear, but with resolve and with kindness and solidarity and a willingness to help people who are in need. That's why I believe we will prevail, because our way of life is stronger. Now, it is extraordinary to be back in Germany. As was mentioned, I visited Berlin as a candidate for president. I have to say, by the way, that I was reminiscing with one of my senior aides, Ben Rhodes, who's here tonight, and I had to remind him that I did not give full approval for setting up the speech outside because I had no idea how many people would show up. And I was a little bit worried that if we only had 50 people there, it would look really bad. It turned out pretty well. In addition, I made 6 visits to Germany as president. And I spent some time this afternoon with somebody whose leadership spanned all of those visits, who I believe has been an extraordinary leader for a free and united Germany, and somebody who was a steadfast partner to me over the 8 years that I was President of the United States, and along the way became a good friend, and that is your Chancellor, Angela Merkel. I very much miss working with her, as I do with Dr. Schäuble, although I must confess that I do not miss the 5 or 6 summits that we had to attend each year. And I also appreciate the fact that I'm getting more sleep these days than you are. I'm going to have an opportunity to take a few questions, but let me first just offer a few observations in light of the extraordinarily kind words that were said before I came. It's been clear for a while that the world is at an inflection point. You have the accelerated pace of globalization and the unrelenting pace of technological change. And these shifts have shaken the foundation of communities, individual families, and our collective politics, both in developed countries and in developing countries. The challenges of our times, whether it's economic inequality, or climate change, or terrorist attacks, or mass migration, these are real challenges, and the pace of change and the shrinking of the globe means that the challenges will accelerate. And what's more, in an age of instant information, where television and Twitter can feed us a steady stream of bad news, and oftentimes feeds on conflict and controversy. I know it can sometimes seem like the international order that was created after World War II is being continually tested, and that maybe the center cannot hold. It leaves people searching for some sense of certainty, some sense of control, some hard ground to stand on. And in some cases, it leads to new calls for isolationism or nationalism, to roll back the rights of others, to retreat into the comfortable point of view that what's good for me is good enough, and everybody else is on their own. And these responses are understandable and sometimes tempting reactions to changing times. During periods like this, as people search for some sense of certainty and stability and control in their lives, it is inevitable that our social arrangements and our politics become disrupted. In fact, the world went through a similar moment in the shift from the agricultural era to the industrial age. And then, too, there was a temptation to respond to great uncertainty by falling back into the comfort of tribes and xenophobia and a politics of us versus them. And the First and Second World Wars showed us all too terribly what happens when we do not respond to changes in a positive way, when we respond out of fear rather than hope. We also know that there is a better way to overcome our fears, to reach across divides, to think anew and to act anew, and to emerge stronger than before. And this too is evident in our history. As was mentioned, and I've said this before here in Germany and around Europe, one of the great achievements in human history was the manner in which the United States and Europe, in the wake of those terrible world wars, built a new international order that allowed us, not always perfectly, oftentimes in fits and starts, but steadily to build a better vision of humanity. A liberal market-based order that placed primacy on our individual rights of freedom of speech and press and religion and assembly, that upheld the rule of law and democracy and pluralism. And from the ruins of war, our countries set out to remake the world and to build this new international order and to build institutions to uphold it. A United Nations that might help avoid a third world war and might advance a more just and lasting peace. International financial institutions to promote prosperity for all peoples. A declaration of human rights to advance the inalienable rights of all members of the human family. And here in Europe, unity bound old adversaries through commerce and through trade and a commitment to democracy and rule of law and the dignity of all people. And none of this was easy. Old animosities had to be overcome. National pride had to be joined with a commitment to a common good. At every step, there was an impulse to pull back, for each country to go on its own or to take advantage of a country that was weaker. And those impulses had to be resisted. More than once, there were skeptics that predicted the demise of this extraordinary project. But the vision of European unity soldiered on, and America stood with you every step of the way. And so in my lifetime, we saw a wall come tumbling down, and Germany emerge unified and stronger than before. Just as in my lifetime we saw Mandela emerge and help lead a country out of the barbarity of apartheid. In my lifetime, we created an international order that allowed us to grow economies that previously had been considered backwaters. The global average life expectancy increased by about 2 decades. We cut extreme poverty in half. This international order and the vision and the ideals that we promoted imperfectly, but nevertheless steadily, made it possible for women to vote in every democracy, made the freedom to marry who you love a reality in a growing number of nations. And although racial and religious discrimination remain a stubborn part of all of our societies, they're no longer considered acceptable, they're no longer considered right, those attitudes. And the next generation embraces diversity and respect and tolerance like never before. Our freedom, our quality of life in the West remains the envy of the world. So much so that families will walk across deserts and cross seas on makeshift rafts, risk everything just for the chance that their children might know the blessings that we enjoy and often take for granted. And that's why, as was mentioned earlier, I do often tell young people that if you had to choose one moment in human history in which to be born and you didn't know ahead of time who you were going to be, you didn't know your nationality or your gender, you didn't know your race, you didn't know whether you were going to be rich or poor or an aristocrat or a peasant. If you didn't know and you were behind a curtain and you said, when would you have the best chance to live the best life? You'd choose right now. Because the world has never been healthier or wealthier, and despite terrible conflicts that continue and the very real specter of terrorism, the world at large is less violent, not more violent, more tolerant, not less tolerant, than it was in previous decades and previous centuries. That's because of the work that previous generations did. We enjoy the fruits of their sacrifice and their labor. And what's also true is that the extraordinary progress that we've made over the decades can be taken for granted, and that it can breed complacency. We have to constantly remind ourselves that our market economies, as flawed as they can be, are the greatest generators of innovation and wealth and opportunity in human history. We have to recall that no EU country has raised arms against another. We should be thankful that we didn't have to climb concrete walls or duck behind barbed wire or hold our breath at a checkpoint to get here today. We take these things for granted, and that can create a sense that the great challenges have passed and that our own pursuits, our own individual pursuits, are the only things that today matter. But we cannot afford complacency. These are times of great promise, but also great peril. Moreover, complacency is not the character of great nations. Today's threats are not, in some cases, as stark as they were in the last century, but the struggle for freedom and security and human dignity goes on. And we will have to summon the same capacity to adapt to new circumstances and to meet changing times while upholding timeless ideals. We still have to work together to replace fear with hope. I've taken great heart to see Europeans standing up recently for that vision in elections in Austria and the Netherlands and in France. And I was discussing this with Chancellor Merkel, and we agreed that perhaps people are more alert to the fact that we need to work on the things that we take for granted. They don't come naturally. It's like tending a garden. You have to get in there and get your hands dirty in order to make things grow. That's the spirit that we need at this defining moment. And I take an interest as a U.S. citizen in what happens on this continent because it has consequences for people around the globe. If a unified, peaceful, pluralistic, free market Europe begins to doubt itself, if it begins to question the very real gains that have been made over the last several decades, then we cannot expect the progress that is just now taking hold in many places around the world to continue. The United States and Europe work together as partners on the world stage. And we make mistakes, and there are times where we act hypocritically. But generally speaking, the values that we care about in promoting women's rights, in promoting education, in promoting justice, and anti-corruption measures, and transparency, and rule of law. Those are things that if we do not promote them, they don't get promoted. So we're going to have to work together, and we need a strong Europe to do that. If we do not, then we will hold the door open to those who argue that democracy doesn't work, who argue that restrictions on the press are necessary, who suggest that intolerance and tribalism and sectarianism and organizing ourselves along ethnic lines are the real answers to the challenges that we face. A view of the world that says, you have to lose in order for me to win. That spirit, too, exists around the world today. So more than ever, a strong, united Europe remains a necessity for all of us. And speaking as an American and as a friend of Europe, our security and our prosperity is bound up in yours. Our economies and our cultures and our peoples are integrated. And your success helps to uphold the democratic norms and rules that can maintain peace and prosperity around the world. Consider what we've done together in the past decade. We wrestled the global economy from the brink of a depression, put the world back on a path to recovery. We negotiated a comprehensive deal that cut off Iran's path to a nuclear bomb, part of a shared vision of a world without nuclear weapons. In Paris, we came together around the most ambitious agreement in history to fight climate change. We helped stop Ebola in West Africa, saved countless lives. We rallied the world around new sustainable development, including goals to end extreme poverty. None of these achievements would have happened if the United States was acting alone, if it did not have a strong partnership with a strong and united Europe. When America and Europe lead with our hopes and not our fears, we do things that other nations and other parts of the world oftentimes will not do. So we cannot stand still. We have to keep moving and keep working, tending that garden. And we have to also acknowledge that there are some very real problems that exist in our world today, and that the forces that sometimes make our people feel like they are powerless in the face of change, we have to address. We have to recognize the need to adapt to today's circumstances in the same way that the generation after World War II adapted to those circumstances. We shouldn't be paralyzed. We have to be inspired to move forward. We have always had the capacity to rebuild our social arrangements and remake our politics and adapt to new changes. So let me just suggest a few things that we have to pay attention to. First, we have to make sure that a high-tech economy works for everybody and not just a few. Capitalism and open markets have raised standards of living around the globe. But globalization and the relentless pace of automation have weakened the position of workers and weakened their ability to secure decent wages. All those efficiencies that have been gained have come at a price. And we know that economies don't work as well or grow as fast when just a few prosper at the expense of a broad middle class. We also have to recognize that economies that are increasingly unequal pose a political threat to the international order. When the top 1% amass a bigger share of wealth and income, it leaves everybody else feeling as if the game is fixed against them, and they mistrust their governments, believing that they only serve powerful interests. And it doesn't help when those who benefit the most from globalization use their political power to further undermine the position of workers. That's a recipe for more cynicism and more polarization and less trust in our societies, and that's what leads people to turn to alternatives that in the long run would do great damage, but channel frustration, anger, and resentment. Now, we can't unwind economic integration. We can't pull up the drawbridge or stuff technology back into a box. It's with us today. I know nobody's going to get rid of their cell phones. I have to take selfies all day long. We're too attached to them. But we are going to have to build new social arrangements to guarantee that all of our young people get the education they need in this high-tech economy. They give workers the power in the service sector to organize for better wages. We have to reform our tax codes so that those who reap the most from this new economy don't avoid their obligations to the countries that made their success possible. And we have to invest in our people, their skills, their education, their capacity to take an idea and turn it into a business. We have to modernize the social safety net so it's more flexible and empowers them to take control of their lives. And just as we work to alleviate inequality within our own countries, I believe that we have to still do more to close the gap between rich and poor nations. Making sure fragile states, whether in Africa or Asia or Latin America or the Middle East, don't collapse in the first place. Helping emerging economies become markets for our goods, that's not just the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. Second, when it comes to the threat of climate change, something the governor, I know, takes great interest in, and we all should. We've shown that environmental sustainability and economic progress are not contradictory. They are complementary. In the United States, under my administration, we doubled production of renewable, clean energy, and we saw record job creation at the same time. And working with other nations, we can now begin to lower carbon emissions enough to buy the next generation the time it needs to develop the next job-creating clean energy breakthroughs. If we don't, we will see more conflict, more refugees, more displacement, more danger. And we will not be able to isolate ourselves from the consequences. Third, we recognize that on the world stage, our biggest threat is not the great power contests of the past, but failed states and rogue states, terrorism, disaffection, too many young men without jobs, too many women who are suppressed, creating social tensions. So we have to sustain our alliances, we have to help other countries with their own development, and we have to combine our extraordinary military power with the power of our economy and our ideals and our diplomacy so that we can shrink the circles of despair and fear and build a landscape of hope. And that's time-consuming, and it's not always easy. but it's important and necessary, and only succeeds when the United States and Europe are working diplomatically together on the world stage. And fourth, we have to recognize that there needs to be a balance between our laws and our traditions, between an openness to immigrants and refugees who are fundamental to our values and our humanity, but also the need for order and some mechanisms to control how they come in. And my nation, perhaps more than any other, is defined by immigrants who make our economy and our culture more dynamic. We are a nation of immigrants. And in recent years, Germany has done perhaps more than any other nation to welcome refugees fleeing war and oppression. And you should be proud of that, because it is a reflection of who you are and who we are as open, liberal societies that value the dignity of every human being. But in maintaining an open heart, we also have to have a hard head in how we do it, and making sure that people feel that this is occurring in a way that maintains social cohesion and rule of law. And it can be done. And I believe that the Chancellor has worked diligently to make that happen. So for the sake of our economies and our values, we have to establish orderly processes to continue to be open to immigration and refugee flows, but do so in a way that the country feels is respectful of traditions. And finally, we have to recognize how technology has changed the way in which people receive information. I noticed that this is a media prize, so let me just say a few words to the media. I hope you don't mind. We are more technologically connected than we've ever been. That also makes it easier, ironically, to retreat into our own bubbles. We can find people on the internet who agree with us no matter how crazy our ideas are. And we can make certain that our assumptions are never challenged. We can be very comfortable in our biases. It makes us so secure in our beliefs that we oftentimes accept only information not based on whether it is true or not, but based on whether it fits our opinions. We don't base our opinions on readily available facts or evidence or reason, but rather, does it confirm how we already think? And democracies do not work if we are not operating at some level based on reason and facts and logic and not just passion. It doesn't work. The United States Constitution was based on the notion that you could have a free and open society and debate and create a marketplace of ideas because the founders had faith in people being able to evaluate those ideas. And a well-informed citizenry is critical for this extraordinary experiment to work. So we're going to have to find new ways to push back on propaganda, to cultivate independent journalism, to listen to those with whom we disagree, to teach our children to evaluate and analyze information effectively, to bridge our differences, to find common ground. And that's especially true of those of us who've had the privilege to serve our peoples. And when trust in our institutions is low, we should reduce the corrosive influence of money in our politics. We should insist on the principles of transparency and ethics in public service. And there is no doubt in America there's too much money in politics and there's too much entrenched partisanship. And the most important cure for that is more participation by citizens. The only way to solve some of the problems with our governments and the degree that they are not as responsive and nimble as they need to be in responding to these great challenges is to get more people involved. In Europe, I have to say that a well-intentioned Brussels can sometimes seem a little too isolated from the normal push and pull of national politics, and too often in capitals, decision makers forget that democracy needs to be driven by civic engagement from the bottom up and not just governance by experts from the top down. And so as leaders of democratic governments make the case for democracy abroad, we have to strive harder to set a good example here at home. If our citizens' expectations are not met, and if they believe they have no control, no voice in the decisions that are made by distant bureaucracies or governments, they will turn from democracy to populism, nationalism, but also potentially authoritarian movements. It has happened before. Democracy is hard, and progress does not move in a straight line, and the gains that we make are often fragile. But I continue to believe what Dr. King said, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I believe that the future does not favor the strong man. I believe deeply that the international order, based not just on military power or national affiliations, but on principles like rule of law and human rights and individual freedoms and compassion and empathy and responsibility and thinking about future generations, that's our only choice. That's what's brought us this far. That's what's promoted economic opportunity and prevented another world war. That's what's lifted millions out of poverty around the globe. So those of us who believe in democracy and believe in that vision need to speak out forcefully, because both the facts and history, I believe, are on our side. Our democracies are not without flaws. But the cure for what ails our democracies is greater involvement by our citizens, not less. And that's what I'll focus my work on for as long as I have, is to encourage active citizenship. The Obama Foundation will be based in Chicago, but we intend to have projects and programs and digital networks all over the world. And many of these will be in partnership with local organizations that are already doing great work in their communities. And our international programming will focus on creating space for a wide range of diverse participants to come together to solve local problems, but also to speak to the world's challenges. And most importantly, to train the next generation of citizens and leaders. Because I believe the future is on our side. Whenever I meet young people in Germany, or Africa, or China, or the United States, the idealism and hard work and willingness to take risks and soulfulness and goodness that I see in young people inspire me every single day. On my first visit to Germany as the next president, I've been reminded even today of some extraordinary young people that I met up in Berlin. And a number of people have mentioned that I don't look as young as I did the first time I came. But I still believe what I said then. If you want to see how to build a peaceful, prosperous, dynamic democracy, look at Germany. Many of you have been responsible for that success. Thank you for leading the way. Thank you for this extraordinary honor. And as you keep fighting for those values that we all hold dear, I look forward to continuing to be your partner. Vielen Dank. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you. I know we've got an outstanding singer, we've got dinner, but I did agree to take a couple of questions. Please.
Darf ich? Ich gehe mal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ich gehe mal ein bisschen da hoch, Herr Präsident, um die Schüler befragen zu können, weil die haben sich darauf vorbereitet. Sie haben, Herr Präsident, ja gesagt, dass Sie es bedauerlich finden, dass Ihre Töchter nicht da sind. Ich glaube, die sind 16 und 18 Jahre alt. Also mit einem... Achso, you need a translation. Otherwise, we can try to do it in English. No problem. Thank you very much for letting us being part in your observations and your remarks and your thoughts, not only dealing the past, but the present and the future. Thank you very much, Mr. President. And there are some questions prepared by students of Baden-Baden high schools, 16, 17, 18-year-old. You're the first, or you are one of those?
Sir, how do you feel of having no pressure of being the president now? And I'm sorry.
Das ist eigentlich... Achso, kann Sie... Okay.
And how is it for you now to be an icon of hope for generations of people?
Well, that you just put a lot of pressure on me just now. You know, people have asked me how does it feel now that I'm no longer president. So I'll offer a couple of observations. I don't miss the trappings of the White House. Because almost uniquely among world leaders, the nature of the U.S. presidency is very isolating. Your movements are very constrained. Wherever you go, there's what's called the bubble. It's very hard just to go take a walk or visit a friend's house. If I wanted to go to a friend's house, the Secret Service used to have to come, and they'd tear up the house and move their furniture. There'd be men with guns on the roof, and so at a certain point I'd say, why don't you just come to my house? It's easier. So I don't miss that. We're renting a house near where we used to live, which is right down the street from the high school where my younger daughter, is still in school. And I'm enjoying looking for the coffee maker and trying to figure out how it works. And I have to negotiate with Michelle and my daughter for closet space because they've taken it all. And so my clothes are in a very small corner. But I enjoy the normal aspects of life that sometimes we also take for granted. What I miss is working with a team of people who are so committed and focused on issues that are of great importance. The great blessing for me of being president was being witness to young people who might have started with me when I was still in the campaign, and by the end were helping to negotiate the Paris Agreement, or were helping to manage the world economy, and to see the incredible talent that exists and the commitment and the strong values that they had. It made me feel gratified. Because as I think was mentioned, it's true. I used to say that there's a reason why I said yes we can, not yes I can. Because we generally don't do significant things by ourselves. I mean, maybe there are a few people, the Mozarts or the Picassos, who are such geniuses they can just go off and create amazing things. But most of us, the things that we do that are worthwhile, we do as part of a larger team. And that was something that was extraordinary, and I do miss that. I also enjoyed getting more sleep, as I mentioned before. And although it's too late to start dyeing my hair, I've been told that I look better than I did right in the middle of the presidency.
Vielen herzlichen Dank. Das war die Frage von Kai Benedikt Frank vom Margraf-Ludwig-Gymnasium. Und one further question. Diese Frage kommt von der jungen Dame Jelena Rajcevic von der Klosterschule vom Heiligen Grab hier in Baden-Baden. Eine Frage auf Augenhöhe. Die haben ja täglich mit Menschen zu tun, die sich für so wichtig halten wie den Präsidenten der Vereinigten Staaten, nämlich mit ihren Lehrern. Also wird das ja gut gehen. Bitte sehr, Jelena.
Mr. Obama, I would like to ask you, do you have any advice for the young people to find new ways to contribute to and lead the change?
Good. Yes,
Thank
I do.
you.
I have all kinds of advice. How much time do you have? As I said before, young people make me very optimistic. I mentioned in Berlin, if you look at the history of great changes, typically they're made by the young, or at least they're started by the young. By the time the young finish, then they may be old like me, but I think that it's the young who ask, as in the words of Robert Kennedy, not why, but why not, who aren't satisfied with the way things are, but say, why can't we feed all the hungry people in the world? Why can't we put an end to war? Why can't we make sure that all people are treated with dignity and respect? And that impulse is necessary. It needs to be leavened with experience and hard work and disappointment, because you have to learn in the real world and not just with your head in the clouds. But that's the place where it starts. Your understanding that you can make extraordinary changes that will have a lasting impact. I mentioned that in the United States, for example, the civil rights movement, which I ended up benefiting from, that fought for voting rights and equal rights, was led by children. Martin Luther King Jr., when he started the Montgomery bus boycott, he was in his 20s. And that's not unusual. So the first thing is to believe that you can, in fact, have an impact in the world. The second thing I say to young people is worry less about what you want to be and more about what you want to do. And what I mean by that is, I think one of the problems in politics, certainly in Washington, but maybe also here in Europe and everywhere around the world, people say to themselves, I want to be a senator, or I want to be a chancellor, or I want to be a president, I want to be a governor. I want to be that thing. I want to hold that office. And sometimes, because of ambition, they're successful in achieving their goal, but when they get there, they don't know what to do with it. They don't have a compass, a moral vision and a direction as to what it is that they want to do with the power that they've obtained. And for me, I think the people that I admire and respect most, and this is not actually just in government, but it's also in business and in the arts, the people who succeed is because they're focused on what they want to do. I want to make sure that children get a good education. I want to make sure that we solve climate change before it's too late. I want to make sure that refugee children have opportunities. I want to make sure that we rid the world of nuclear weapons, whatever it is, because if you start there with that passion of trying to get something done, even if you don't achieve your office that you're looking for, you still will have done extraordinary work along the way, and you will feel good about yourself, and you'll have a sense of purpose in your life, and you're usually going to do a better job because you're focused on something that you care deeply about. And then the third thing I would just say, which I already mentioned, is be persistent. Because doing anything of worth takes time, and it's hard. And if you are faint of heart, then you won't have an impact. But if you're bold and strong and learn from the mistakes that you make, then you will. Now, I have a much longer list, but we're running out of time. But I'm very hopeful about outstanding students like yourselves, and I look forward to seeing all the great things that you will do in the future. So, thank you very much.
Dankeschön.